just circle. All right, so we're going to go over the part 2 of the global regions, which is the CRQ. So you should be able to see this right over here, and this is in Google Classroom, so you can also kind of follow along and make a copy and take a look at it. These directions that are on the first page, that's what it's going to look like on the day that you go to do your regions. So when you're looking at this, you're going to see that there are 2 sets. Is 3 questions. Question 1 goes with document 1, question 2 with document 2, then question 3 with documents 1 and 2. And typically, even though it says relationship between the documents, your first set, this question number 3 is always going to be cause and effect. So they're really good about creating a formula for you so that you know what to expect. The second set of the CRQ, again, the first question will go with document 1, second question with document 2, and then the last set of questions is going to be a 2-point question, and it's going to be a relationship, and it's only going to be one of 2 options. It's either going to be a similarity or difference that you have to identify between the 2 documents, or it's going to be a turning point that you have to identify and then explain. So for the first set, it's just going to deal with the idea of a cause and effect. How does document 1 cause document 2? So for the second set, you're going to have to figure out what is the similarity between doc 1 and 2, or what is the turning point that documents 1 and 2 have in common, right? So for that, we're going to take and scroll down and take a look at document 1. So the important thing to remember about these is that there's very rarely going to be a simple answer that you can just copy and paste out of the document and put into the answer. You're actually going to have to think of an answer for them. So for this particular document, read your question first. Explain the historical circumstances that led to the development of the Treaty of Versailles. There's only 2 options for the first document. It's either historical circumstances or geographic context. And we're going to look at both of those options today. So for historical circumstances, they're basically saying, why was this document created? So when they're saying explain the historical circumstance that led to the development of the Treaty of Versailles, they really just want you to know, why was the Treaty of Versailles created? Which you don't really need if you know your context. You don't really need to read the document. So when we're looking at document 1 and saying, why was this document created? We have to know that the Treaty of Versailles ends World War I. And so we would put in here something along the lines of that the historical circumstances was the end of World War I, or anything about World War I. So we could talk about how Germany lost World War I and were forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Or we could talk about how Germany and Austria-Hungary declared war on Russia and France, and therefore World War I began, eventually causing the Treaty of Versailles to be created. So any of those could be possible answers, but the important thing is it's not something that we pulled from this document. It's something completely unique on its own that we have to really know. When we see historical circumstances, we want to think of why. Why did that document, was it created? This is only a 1-point question. So each of these CRQ questions are worth the same as a multiple choice. So I don't want you super stressing out if you get to the regions and you're not 100% sure of how to do the questions. And these are great if you have somebody and you get a little stuck, you can have somebody kind of come over, ask some extra questions, see if you can figure it out. So let's take a look at document 2, and Ms. Dunn's going to take a look at that one with you guys.
Yeah, so document 2, the issue we run into with political cartoons is a lot of times they have a lot to do with what is going on in popular culture at the time. So they don't always make a whole lot of sense with us the first time around. So we have to read the context that we're given and the question that they're asking us. So we're going to read the question first because that'll tell us what we're going to look into with this political cartoon. So the question says, based on the cartoon, explain how audience affects the way Daniel Fitzpatrick presents his idea. So if Daniel Fitzpatrick is presenting the idea, we know he's going to be the author without even reading up here the little blurb that tells us that. So when we read this blurb, it says, Daniel Fitzpatrick was an editorial cartoonist for the St. Louis Dispatch from 1913 to 1958, during which time his cartoons were published in 35 newspapers in the United States. So lots of everywhere. During the 1920s and 30s, while the United States was looking inward, Fitzpatrick was one of the first American cartoonists to warn of the dangers of fascism in Europe. So he was one of the first American political cartoonists who really had any sort of information and a strong opinion about fascism in Europe creeping towards the rest of the Western world. So, based on this cartoon, we have to explain how the audience that he's writing to affects how he's presenting this idea. So, the first thing you want to identify is who is his audience? Where are the newspaper or the cartoons that he's producing? Where are those newspapers going to? And the answer is the United States. It's going to the St. Louis Dispatch, if we want to be specific, but it's going to 35 different states or different papers in the United States. So, we know his audience is the US. And Halsberg, do you want to take it away a little bit on the actual concept of fascism in Europe at this time?
Sure. So what we have to remember is that after World War I, the United States went into a period of isolation. So they did not sign the Treaty of Versailles. They did not join the League of Nations. They were completely focused. And if you see in the passage, it tells you that they were looking inward, meaning that they were looking really at what was going on in the U.S. They were not focused on what was happening in Europe. And Daniel Fitzpatrick was one of those people who realized the United States had to be concerned about what was going on. So he saw the rise of Hitler. So it's very hard to see sometimes in the writing, but they'll usually make it a little clearer.
You have to look really closely at all of the writing
really
you can
hard.
see in political cartoons. That's the number one thing. You want to describe what is happening. So there's literally a dude crawling out of a pipeline of some kind. And you want to look at any words you can see, because if you could see words and you can't see other words. So if you look at that document that is on top of the Versailles Treaty, which I'm assuming is actually the Treaty of Versailles, you can't see any actual writing there. So we know that's not important, which means the writing we can see is.
Mm-hmm. So he's crawling out of the Treaty of Versailles. And it's very hard to see, but they're actually labeling him as being Hitler up here. Another key indicator that this is Hitler is that if you look very closely at his face, you see that very distinguishable mustache that Hitler has. So we are looking at him kind of warning Americans about Hitler. And basically, he's trying to say to Americans, stop being isolated. You really need to worry about Hitler, because Hitler is not going to just be satisfied with what's going on in Europe.
So literally in front of us, we see like the depiction of Fitzpatrick's idea that fascism is literally creeping secretly towards America through that Versailles Treaty. And that's, if you can explain that out, and you can explain that he's doing this to show Americans and to warn Americans that this is happening, you've got your answer.
Yep. And the good part about this is, again, very similar to what we just talked about. These types of questions are very formulaic. So the first question, historical circumstances, geographic context. The second question is always going to be audience, purpose, bias, or point of view. So we know what kinds of questions to expect from this region. And if the first set of the second one is an audience, your second one for the next set is not going to be audience. It's going to be either point of view, purpose, or bias. So then you get to the last set right here. And this is a question where you have to actually connect the documents together. Now, in this one, they will give you the definition of cause effect. They will give you the definition of turning point. They will give you the definition of similarity or of difference. So if you ever get stuck, you can go back to these definitions and be like, wait a minute, what do they mean by effect? And they can go back and actually look at that definition again. And it says, identify and explain a cause and effect relationship associated with historical developments in documents 1 and 2. And this is really the key piece that we want to pay attention to. It says, be sure to use evidence from both documents 1 and 2 in your response, which means if you don't use evidence from both documents, I can't give you that very easy point. Now, normally, I will tell you more than likely 9 out of 10 times, the first document is going to be the cause, and the second document is going to be the effect. They're going to do it in chronological order. So it's not going to be super complicated to figure out which one caused what and how do I know what to do. So you really can just very simply say, document 1 is the cause because the Treaty of Versailles put punishments on Germany. This led the effect of Adolf Hitler coming to power, as shown in document 2. And in one sentence, I'm able to give both of my parts here. I'm able to identify and explain a cause and effect. Now, this again is only worth 1 point. So if all you do is just say document 1 causes people to be unhappy and document 2 causes a man to come out of a tube, that's not clear enough for us to be able to give you that point. You have to make sure you're using an example from the document.
It's got to tie into history somehow.
You got it. I can't be stressed out enough. You got to tie it to history. You got to show us what you know. But again, it's only worth 1 point. So I don't want you guys to get frustrated if you're not sure how to answer the question. So that's our first set of CRQs. So let's go to our second set of CRQs. So this second set, again, goes right back to starting with a document 1. And here's our geographic context. So his historical circumstances means why. Why in history was that created? Geographic context means why did it develop there? And usually the geographic context can be a little easier because most of the times they'll give you a map, all right? And we're looking at and saying, explain the geographic context for the historical development shown on this map. So it says the growth of the Japanese Empire, 1931 to 1941. And we can see that Japan is right here. They've labeled it nicely for us. We're not forced to memorize our continents, so you really should. And memorize our countries, though you really should.
Yeah,
so
I
you
used to
want
have
make
map
sure.
quizzes in high school. We used to have to label, like, I still have all of my maps from high school, like, labeled and marked, like, Europe 1914. Like, it's so bad.
Yep. So we really should know where Japan is. We should really know that China is nearby and that the
We
Soviet
should know
Union at the
Japan is
time
an
is up here.
island and still an
Japan
island
is an island.
at Dariani.
And that's really important because Japan, being an island, doesn't have a lot of resources. So they had to go to other countries to imperialize and create empires so that they could get more resources. And really this question is saying, explain the geographic context. Why did Japan take over parts of Korea and Manchuria and eventually China? So think about it. When we were talking about geography, why did Japan invade this region of the world and not invade, Great Britain, not invade parts of Africa? And the answer is very simply, Japan is geographically close to the rest of Asia.
Yeah, it's
so
closer.
this question is a very simple answer of just saying Japan is close to Asia. Japan was close to China. Japan is next to Korea. So we're not looking for a super complex answer. And that's what I want to point out with this geographic context. Usually the answer is very simple. It's not something that's overtly complicated. So I don't want you to think that you're going to have this very complex answer. It looks like a hard question, but it's a very easy question.
Yeah, geographic context is a really scary phrase, but if you think of it in the idea of like, why did you choose to go to one store over another? Why did this store pop up in this area instead of downtown? That makes it make a lot more sense. Big global history can be really overwhelming and scary sometimes, but when you think of it in smaller kind of pictures like that, it gets easier. Like, why did Japan go over to this store instead of the other one? Because it's literally closer and you don't want to take the bus.
Exactly. So now we're going to take a look at document 2, which again is going to be dealing with something about the author. And in this case, it's talking about the purpose. So I'm going to have Ms. Dunn take a look at it with you about purpose.
Yeah. So we're going to start off by reading our question. So the question says, based on the excerpt, explain Dr. Help me out with this one, Ms. Heilsberg. Tachishiro Akazuki?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Tachishiro Akazuki, Dr. Akazuki's purpose for writing about what occurred in Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. So our question for us is literally why? What's the point? Why is he writing this? Who is he trying to tell? What is he trying to tell them? So we go up and we read the blurb at the top of the document where it says, Dr. Tachishiro Akazuki, there we go, was a physician or a doctor practicing in Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. He kept notes on his experience during and after the bombing. In 1961, when he was asked about his experience, he felt it was his responsibility to write them down in a book. In 1969, Dr. Akazuki helped establish the Nagasaki Testimonial Society to increase written records of the Nagasaki atomic bomb survivors. His book, Nagasaki 1945, was published in 1982. So I can tell you why he wrote this without even reading this document. It's probably to give an accurate and usually maybe emotional, maybe scientifically factual account of the atomic bomb that hit Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. I haven't even read it, and I know that that's going to be the answer. And why did he write this? Well, he's writing it. They explain it in that blurb. They tell us up there. He's writing it to help them remember, and he felt like it was his responsibility to write these down in a book to kind of keep that those stories preserved for future generations to learn from their stories. So I'm sure if we went through and read this word for word, we'd find a lot of those answers. Even just skimming it, I can see he's got a lot of really descriptive imagery in here. The buildings I could see were on fire. Electricity poles were wrapped in flame like so many pieces of kindling. Trees on the nearby hills were smoking. It shows us exactly how terrifying and destructive that bomb was, and that's his purpose.
And really, that's the key thing that Ms. Dunn did is you don't need to worry about the length of the document. I don't want you to get scared away by these types of documents and go, oh my God, I can't read this. I've been testing for 2 hours and the last thing I want to do is read more documents.
Yeah,
but
I
a lot
read
of times
the
the answer is right in here.
And I read the blurb, and that's all it took. And then I skimmed
That's
through
awesome.
a little bit to make sure I was on the right track. All of a sudden, if I had seen something about things being happy and fine and good, I'd have maybe paused and reconsidered and taken it up with a Regent State ed. But you don't have to read every single word for all of these, especially if you're someone who's feeling stressed out by that. If all those words jumble together, get you mixed up, you can't remember if you read something in this document or the other, you know that it's going to have to be about Japan. You saw the word atomic bomb in that first start. You know what happens in August 1945. You can figure it out from there.
And that's really the key, is that I don't want you guys stressing out about these types of CRQs, because again, this is only worth 1 point. The same reason that I don't want you stressing out for a multiple choice, I just want you to read through. And most of the time, this is the part that you guys would end up skipping, when in fact it tells you the answer without you reading this entire thing, because you would have read this whole thing and been like, I don't know why he wrote this, it's too hard. When it tells you right in here why he felt the need to write this down, what his purpose really is.
That's why it's really important not to skip those blurbs too. A lot of times we skip those things because we think they're not important. They're smaller text, and the Regents does that to trip you up. It's just a fact. We see we found the answer in that document, in the not in the document, but in the blurb. And that same, if we go back to that political cartoon we were on in the last set of questions, we found that a lot of those answers in the blurb, where his audience was, where we were writing to, that stuff wasn't in the document. We have to read that stuff too, but don't stress too much, because chances are you've read these documents before with us in class in some capacity or another. The blurbs are new information that they need to give you, and that's where your answers will lie.
Exactly. So now we're pretty much almost done. We only have 1 question left. Now, this question is a little unique. That it's actually a 2-point question. So there's a really good way for you to get even one of the 2 points, even if you're struggling with it. So this particular one, in my opinion, the turning point questions and the audience questions are probably the hardest types of questions. And this turning point one is a little difficult. So when you're looking at it, again, it tells you exactly what a turning point is. So don't get frustrated by going, oh my God, I don't even know what the question's asking, because a turning point is a major event, idea, or historical development that brings about significant change. It can be local, regional, national, or global. So when you're looking at the questions, again, we're using evidence from both documents. If you don't use both documents, we can't give you both points. So it says identify a turning point associated with the events, ideas, or historical developments related to both documents. So even just sitting there and saying one turning point is blah, you're going to get a point for that, as long as that turning point that you've mentioned is connected to documents 1 and 2. And then you're going to get a second point to explain why the events, ideas, or historical developments associated with these documents are considered a turning point. And then again, remembering to use evidence from both documents 1 and 2. So if I were to answer this question, I would talk about it and say that a turning point associated with these documents is World War II. Because World War II, Japan was attempting to expand their empire, which eventually caused them to bomb Pearl Harbor, which is part of document 1, because that empire expansion is in there, and it says in the key, even talks about before bombing Pearl Harbor. Ultimately, this led to the United States and Japan fighting in World War II, which led to the United States dropping the bomb on Nagasaki, which is from document 2. So not only did I state my turning point and get that first point, but I explained it. And this should be about 2 sentences, because you want a sentence where you're answering A and a sentence where you're answering B. Be super long. It shouldn't be 1 word. You want to make sure that you're writing down for these CRQs more than just 1 word, that at least a full sentence should be there. Because if you're putting down 1 word, more than likely, it's not going to be enough for us to give you that point.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Heilsberg, but these are the types of questions where there's not specifically just one right answer.
No,
So long as you explain yourself thoroughly, you could get away with, maybe you don't know that this is kind of the turning point that starts World War II, but maybe you know that we don't use atomic bombs anymore, and this is why. And it started with Japan spreading and expanding in the first document and ends with the bombs that we dropped on them in the second. You don't need to know dates, times, specifics like that. If you know
no.
little things like that and you explain yourself thoroughly, chances are we can fight and to give you the points.
I had students that sat and, when we did this as a class with some of my students and we talked about it, they were like, well, could we say the Japanese Empire as a turning point? And go, absolutely, because in the first document, it's showing the Japanese Empire expanding. In the second document, the Japanese Empire has ended when the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. I had New York State, when they made up their answer key, they connected this to the Cold War. And they said you could say that eventually it's going to lead to the arms race, and that Japan expanding brought the United States and the Soviet Union into conflict eventually with each other. So there's a lot of things you can do and say so long as you support it. With pretty much all of the CRQs, there's no perfect one right answer. And that is the one nice thing about this test, is that you don't need the perfect, this is the only option. If you write something and you're able to back it up with evidence, and you'll have 5 socialist teachers that will be in a room looking and grading these exams, and they'll all be able to look at it and say, yes, we agree that this is an answer. And New York State gives us an answer key of like 15 different options for each question. So there's always the possibility that what you're saying and what you're doing is going to be correct. The worst thing you can do is leave the question blank.
And
so
even
at least make an effort.
Yeah, and even if you're just like really stuck and you feel like you're not understanding the documents, look and try and find like a word that connects those documents. So like Japan, right? Japan connects these 2 documents. We have a map of Japan and we have an account of a bomb that was dropped on Japan. And try and remember anything you can from class. If you're really stuck, just remember things that happened in that time period and see if you can get something on the paper. Something is better than nothing.
And I've had girls who have gotten to a turning point question and they didn't clearly identify the turning point, but they did explain a turning point and how it's connected to the 2, and that got them one of those 2 points. So there's always a possibility that you might earn a point, even if you don't feel like you actually earned a point.
Yeah, and
We're
those
not
of you
out to
who
get
are
you.
No, we're out to give you as many points as we can. And those of you who are in here because you missed by 1 point, this is the type of question that had you tried an answer on, could have gotten you there. So you want to have an answer for literally everything.
All right. So this is our breakdown of a CRQ, and we will more than likely do another breakdown, possibly of an enduring issues essay, so that you guys can hopefully join. If you have questions, please reach out to Ms. Dunn or I so that we can support you. Come to the Google Meets, and we'll be happy to break it down for you again. Shoot us both an email or one of us, and we'll be happy to continue to work with you.
Yes. All right. This was super informative for me, too. Thanks, Halsberg.
No problem. Have a great day, ladies.
All right. Bye, guys.
There we go.
There we go. I was just waiting for you to be done recording.
I was like trying to find how to do that again.